All right, welcome back to another episode of Health with Hashimoto's. I am so excited for you to listen to this episode. I have a special guest, and we are talking about oxalates. So, I heard about this book, Toxic Superfoods, on another podcast, listening to an interview, and now I get to interview the author, Sally K. Norton. So, let me tell you a little bit about her, and then we'll get into her story. Sally is a leading expert on dietary oxalates. Don't worry, she's going to tell you what they are. Um, and she has her nutritional science degree from Cornell University and a master's in public health from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So she is not just like spouting anything from the top of her head. She is researched, she has credibility. She really knows what she's talking about. For over 30 years, she's been helping people with health and wellness, and she specializes now in oxalate aware eating. And she's going to tell us why that is so important. So, Sally, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about your story? Obviously, you were interested in nutrition, in health. What got you interested in oxalates? And then, of course, what are they?
Well, in school, oxalates are covered just a paragraph here and there in your textbooks. And, those people who get kidney stones or have kidney problems need that low oxalate diet, and you're done. You know everything you need to know. Well, that is a just big black hole for you to fall into, which is what happened to me. My unawareness of oxalates' effect on our physiology and that we're eating enough of it to affect your health landed me in a life of struggle. And I realize now both thyroid issues and oxalate issues, which are intimately connected, have been affecting my life since before I was even conceived.
Oh,
Yeah, my mom had three miscarriages. She had a baby, two miscarriages, a baby, a miscarriage. Her pregnancy with me was declared a miscarriage. And it turned out it was, of course, because her thyroid level was low.
wow.
Because they just really didn't diagnose that back in the 60s and late 50s when she was starting to have her family. And I'm now suspecting that my mother was suffering from oxalate related thyroid damage. Oxalate is this tiny little chemical that plants make that's in a lot of popular foods. In my family, my mom grew up in the Depression era, and they relied on garden greens like beet greens and chard, and they had rhubarb and made rhubarb desserts, especially rhubarb crisp, which is delicious. I grew up on that, loved that when it was in season. And those foods are really high in oxalic acid. So oxalic acid is a tiny little two-carbon molecule that has a charge on it and can drop another proton and get another negative charge. So it's a strongly charged, uber tiny little acid, oxalic acid, and it grabs minerals and it connects with things like calcium. And that's its connection with kidney stones. You see, you have to pee out this acid, you eat it, it gets into your bloodstream, moves through your liver, your heart, your lungs, your veins, your arteries, everything. And then your kidneys have to get it out. And if you have a particular kind of difficulty handling all this oxalate in your diet, you can end up with kidney stones. Or if you're just really overdoing the oxalates on and on and on, you will eventually get kidney stones. But a lot of us, we don't get the kidney stones. But this calcium oxalate that forms in nature, plants use it to its advantage. Plants not only make oxalic acid that we're eating, but they also build calcium oxalate crystals specifically for lots of metabolic purposes and self-defense. So they'll make these double pointed toothpick spears that are super uber tiny that can puncture cells too deep. They're literally designed as baited arrows to puncture your membranes
Oh.
and to make it hard for insects to chew on them. And they make big blocks and put them in their bark. Something like cinnamon will have blocks uber to us, small, but kind of big if you're a burrowing beetle. It's like a little not good to chew on. So nature makes oxalic acid. Plants will build it up as calcium oxalate crystals. You will eat oxalic acid and calcium oxalate crystals, both in these foods that include not just the chard beet greens, um, rhubarb, and spinach. Spinach and nuts, almonds, almond milk, cashews, peanuts, which we eat a lot of. We tend to potatoes, the big baking potatoes that we make French fries and tater tots out of, and then beets themselves. That's beet sweet potatoes. This is all like baby foods. When you're one, you get your chocolate cake, and Then you start eating nuts and, then you go all gluten-free or something and you're adding in quinoa and these gluten-free products have high oxalate ingredients. So if you start having health problems and you go into like dairy free, that's another problem because you need the calcium, a high calcium diet to help you manage this thing that grabs calcium because this thing that grabs calcium is sucking you dry of calcium.
Right.
And so you got a little bit of calcium ions in your bloodstream, and oxalate gets in there and can start grabbing the calcium out of your blood. And it can start causing inflammation, which causes acidity. So the body will start pulling calcium and minerals out of the blood to keep your pH good and to keep your calcium levels right in the blood. So you can be, working on weak bones, messing up your growth. If you're a baby and you get calcium deficiency and iron deficiency and other mineral deficiencies because your mom's on a high oxalate diet or feeding you high oxalate foods, it's going to affect your growth, your weight gain, the size of your body. It's going to affect lots of things. So we eat oxalic acid and foods we trust and love have no idea we're doing this. So you mentioned oxalate aware eating. If you don't know what you don't know, you have no idea that food that is purported to be healthy actually has problematic oxalic acid and oxalate crystals in it. So the oxalic acid is the part that gets into your bloodstream and starts messing with your electrolytes and causing your poor liver has to use up glutathione because it's causing a lot of cell damage and oxidative stress, which means not enough of your own inherent glutathione is being made to keep up with the damage that's happening. And then that brings in inflammation and it wears you out. Your all kinds of tissues wear out, including your circulatory white blood cells. So I didn't know any of this stuff, even though I went to Cornell for nutrition. And, being a health geek, I was a vegetarian for 8 years and then a vegan for 8 years. And none of that was working well for me, but I couldn't admit it. I wouldn't ever imagine my perfect diet had anything to do with the fact that I had no energy and I was just dragging mentally, physically, as everything was an effort. And I was having arthritis and back problems. And it just went on and on. And I had foot problems in college. I couldn't walk properly. I ended up needing painkillers, crutches, wheelchairs. I had to get permission to drive on campus at Cornell. Had surgery, didn't recover well from it. I went for pretty much 30 years with imperfect feet. I mean, I got past the painkillers and the crutches after about 7 or 8 years, but continued to be unable to go barefoot or to run or do sports or any of that until I turned 50. Right before I turned 50, I had made this connection between arthritis and oxalates. And then I got real surprised after I really got serious about changing my diet and getting these high oxalate foods. I was eating Swiss chard at least once a week, most of my life, including when I was in college. And sweet potatoes had become a recent staple for me because I was now having trouble eating the grains, especially wheat and bread. So sweet potato was my bread, and I was like struggling with my health. Well, it's so interesting in the literature because these calcium oxalate stones that form in your kidneys and can cause cloudy, crystally urine forms it anywhere. And glands tend to get oxalate crystals. Turns out that by the time you're middle age, you have over an 80% chance that you have basically microscopic kidney stones forming in your thyroid gland.
Oh,
It's
wow.
like universal. That's a huge percentage of us. And it turns out the longer you live, the more you eat peanuts and potatoes and Swiss chard and beet greens and sweet potatoes, the more oxalates is building up in your diet because it ends up getting stuck in these tissues. And glands pull in a lot of materials. They're making a product. Your thyroid gland is making thyroid hormones and processing them and doing else. Well, it's like a factory, and a factory has a big shipping and receiving department. So it's
Mhm.
pulling in a lot of materials. And I think the glands just naturally pull in a lot of oxalic acid when it's high in your blood, which is in this period of about 30 minutes to about 8 hours after you ate something. There's this wave of higher levels of oxalate in the blood, which is not a good thing after meals. And it doesn't take that long for it to start getting in your blood because it starts being absorbed from your stomach right away and in the upper small intestine. So what we're doing is with our diet, especially now that spinach and spinach smoothies and juicing is so popular, and now keto diets where we're using more nuts. Nuts are now, I mean, mainstream nutrition used to say, don't eat nuts, they're too fatty, because in the 80s we became fat phobic and now we're relaxing on that. And so now everyone is snacking on trail mixes or doing keto breads or just really seeing like chocolate covered nuts everywhere. You can't stand in line and, you could be buying shoelaces and there's chocolate covered nuts in the checkout aisle. You can be buying a hammer at the home improvement store and there's a wall of chocolate candies there and usually packages of nuts. So we're just dripping in high oxalate foods without this awareness. And even a lot of these studies are from the 90s, back when we were fat phobic and we weren't pigging out an almond milk. I mean, almond milk is a new phenomenon. So is dark chocolate, and so is a smoothie and juicing. To have these things be mainstreamed or gluten-free, all this stuff has really been blooming in the last 20 years, but a lot of this research is 40 years ago. So imagine now that our exposure is higher, you can only guess that it's not just 80% of people who are age 50 and so on. It's all of us. And so
Right.
having a toxic crystal form in your tissues, especially your thyroid gland, that's that's particulate pollution, going to irritate your immune system, going to cause a lot of immune engagement, immune work, and you can start creating autoimmune problems as you fill your body up with little toxic crystals.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Okay, so let me summarize and make sure I'm following. So, oxalates and oxalic acid, I told my husband, is kind of like the spikes or the thorns on cactus, except at a microscopic level. And we eat those in foods that are supposed to be healthy. When I looked at the list in your book, I was like, oh my goodness, this is so horrible. Because everything that I eat is high. Like I add 2 tablespoons of chia seeds every morning to my breakfast because they're high in healthy fiber, high in healthy fats. They're seeds. And when I went back to school for holistic health, they were constantly telling us eat seeds and nuts. So, I mean, and then I also have cacao powder with my breakfast because, again, it's a superfood, lots of flavonoids. And those were two of the top things on your list of high foods. I'm like, oh my goodness. And that's just breakfast. And the rest of my day, also, like all of these healthy foods, which were high in oxalates, nuts, seeds. Um, I don't really love spinach, so that one wasn't a problem, but I know I have gone through spinach like periods in my life. So we eat these foods that are supposed to be healthy. They have these teeny tiny microscopic um, thistles, toothpicks, whatever, and those are damaging our tissues, especially our thyroid and kidney. And then our body is like, oh my goodness, there's a problem. And so it starts to attack and try to clean things up. Am I following so far?
Yes, yes. And I think
Okay.
it's worth making a clear distinction about the crystals that we're eating and the acid, because it's coming from when you're eating it, you're eating both the acid and the crystals. The
Okay.
crystals are mostly causing damage that would bring inflammation to your digestive tract. You don't really absorb the crystals, they just cause your whole digestive tract to get inflamed,
Okay.
which turns up your immune engagement, which when you mess with the gut, you're messing with your nervous system, your digestive system, and your immune system. And this is not good to have chronic, basically eating finely ground glass. That can literally wear down your teeth. So just chewing, if you bother to chew, which we don't do anymore because it's all almond milk and smoothies and blended this, and we suck food down real fast. But back in the day, when we chewed, before modern electricity, we chewed a lot more. It would wear down your teeth, get dental micro wear, and literally wear them down enough that you could get problems. But also, that's because while you're eating a high oxalate food that has those crystals, you're also eating a high oxalate food that has the acid. Now, the acid is a cleaning product. You can strip the rust off your patio and your engine, and you can bleach the stains out of wood and fabric and etch into stone. It's an acid. And you're eating this acid that roams around and eventually grabs calcium. So the other thing that's happening in your thyroid gland, so it's acid that's getting into your thyroid gland, but the other thing that's getting in your thyroid gland is vitamin C, because we supplement vitamin C.
Hmm.
Vitamin C in your body degenerates into oxalate. Right
Interesting.
there in your cell, you're creating oxalate because you're supplementing vitamin C.
Okay. My
It's
goodness.
another
Okay.
superfood approach.
Another, yeah.
So the distinction there, just to again drive this home, you're eating both crystals and acid. The acid is the one that can get so easily in your bloodstream and start messing with your circulating immune cells. But the crystals are causing an inflammation just because it's irritating a most critical tissue of your body, and that's your digestion. But then the acid is right away within 40 minutes of a spinach smoothie, your immune cells are damaged and they're now going and they're putting out pro-inflammatory cytokines. So that's raising generalized systemic inflammation in the body as well.
Okay. Okay. Before I ask any more questions, I've got my number one question for my husband every time I talk about this, which has only been for like 2 or 3 weeks. He's like, yeah, but
Yeah,
I mean,
but
there's,
good. Yeah,
yeah,
listen
but,
to the yeah,
um,
buts.
he's like, every other year there's something new that we should stay away from, and then new research is going to come out and it's going to say that is good and something else is bad. So why should I believe you? Why should you believe Sally about this oxalate thing? Is this just another fad? Can you go into that? Because I tried to tell him, I'm like, no, in the book she's like talking about things like Civil War era, they knew about this. So tell us a little bit about why can we trust this data?
I love this because for one thing, I avoided in my career telling people what to eat. I worked in academia in holistic education of professionals and grant writing and planning research projects and doing education around holistic health and healing and public healthy stuff. So I wouldn't have to stand here and talk to you at your face and say, I think that chia seed in your breakfast is a really dumb idea. Let's not do that anymore. So it's and so I love the older research. I did a whole Nancy Drew thing because this thing exploded my brain. It just like, what? You mean I've had arthritis since I was 12 because of my healthy diet, like the foods that are good for me. I've been gardening since I was 9, and I've been giving myself severe disadvantages in life. I had severe arthritis as a kid, for example. I was like blown away. So I love research and hanging out. I'm like Nancy Drew in library, and you read an article and you think, and they're citing that. Really? Let's go see what the citation really says. And half the time it doesn't. And they cite a bunch of others, and they cite a bunch of others, and everyone. And so you go through this maze, and you land in the 1700s. It turns
It's a long time.
oxalic acid has been used in science since the Dark Ages. They use it for all kinds of purposes. And we could do an hour on just that. And so it's well known in the geek circles of very specialized bench research. And it was also known in clinical medicine by the world expert on kidney problems in the 1840s, in the 1830s. This guy was named Golding Bird, and he was a great professor. And he wrote this book about urinary deposits and how to look at urine and what to tell about your patient's health, because this was a very prominent part of health care back in the early 1800s. And he also had oxalate poisoning. That's why he had insights to this, because he's lived it, he's seeing it in his patients. Many of his patients are fellow doctors because he's a professor. He kind of invented professorness. I mean, this is really in the beginning of medical science that was very Western and technical. And these guys saw this oxalic acid syndrome and they defined it and diagnosed it starting in the 1840s. They gave it a name. And for 100 years, this was a clinical diagnosis that was controversial. And the reason it's controversial is because it shows up so differently in everybody. So it doesn't present the same. And it's mostly a silent disease, but when it gets you, it gets your nervous system, it gets your gut, and it gets your connective tissues. So you tend to get weird. You tend to be apathetic or irritable or neurotic or depressive or panic attacking and freaking out, like really changes your nervous system and how you're functioning. So part of the diagnosis back then was digestive issues. Some people would show up, it looks like they're getting a complete stoppage of their colon, like obstruction. Colonic obstruction was one of the presenting, but if there was somebody complaining about some digestive issue and they either had rheumatic pains, arthritis, and fibromyalgia, stuff like that, or they had neurological signs, which would be mood changes, muscle twitching, hiccups, all kinds of stuff, Bell's palsy, all kinds of things can happen with neurological. Then let's look at the urine and see if you've got the crystalline urine, because you end up forming calcium oxalate little molecules that crystallize as you're forming urine in the kidneys and the bladder, and you can see it in the microscope. This diagnosis got dropped around the time where we decided we can rely on blood tests to tell us everything about the body, which is pretty foolish, actually.
Yes. Yes, it is.
Because if you let disease hang around in your bloodstream, you're not going to make it. So the body will do all kinds of backflips and sacrifice bone tissue and everything else in order to keep the blood as nice as it can. So you're not going to find early stage, you're not going to detect early problems in blood, but it's a way of making medicine exclusive because only certain people are allowed to stick needles in your arm and to order testing and prescribe medication. And you make medicine high tech and, you know, you get a successful profession. But what it's done is it narrowed healthcare away from noticing these kinds of lifestyle and dietary problems that can be forming. And generally, we've moved away from root cause, right? Because in medicine, we end up managing the mid to late stages of disease rather than looking for the risk factors, really looking for risk factors and early signs and symptoms that will not show up in standard testing. That takes the art of medicine, which is more touchy-feely. So, root causes of disease are real simple, and I talk about them in Toxic Superfoods. It's really just two major prongs that will be the basis of all disease. One is toxicity, and the other is nutritional deficiency, right? Now, there's
Yep.
peripheral things like you need human touch and you need sunlight and you need activity. If somebody locks you in a closet and doesn't talk to you for days or weeks or months, you will not thrive. But for the freewheeling person who knows enough to go outside once in a while, toxicity and deficiency is the root of everything. An oxalate is a toxin that causes deficiencies, mineral deficiencies, B vitamin deficiencies. It's draining you of essential nutrients and poisoning you at the same time. It is the ultimate and root cause because it's something you do day in and day out. You have breakfast every day, and then you throw a little something healthy on your lunch, and then you treat yourself to a nice little extra chocolate later, even though you had a little cacao for breakfast, you know, and maybe you treated yourself to potatoes for dinner because you were a good girl all day. You've had oxalate 3 or 4 times a day,
Right.
every
Right.
day.
So my listeners, they love looking into the root cause, and I help them figure out how to look for the root cause, what to look for, and then how to take charge of their own healthcare. I tell them over and over, you are the CEO of your own health. Your doctor is on your board of directors, but you get to make the ultimate decision.
Nice.
So, can you tell my listeners, like, how do they know? You've listed some foods. How do they know if they have high oxalates? Like what are some symptoms and some foods? And then what do they do next?
Right, right. So on my website and in Toxic Superfoods, I have an inventory where you can check off what kind of symptoms are related to oxalates and whether you have them, and you can check off the foods. And if you've been eating high oxalate foods for any period of time, you are probably beyond your consumption and exposure to this toxin is past what your body can handle. Well, there's an upper limit that's probably variable, but in this medical literature, we call a high oxalate diet 250 milligrams of oxalate. And we call an extremely and dangerous oxalate diet 600 milligrams a day. Well, your average spinach smoothie is somewhere over 800 milligrams, closer to 1,000 milligrams. So you're in that what I call danger zone if you're doing things like concentrating your spinach and so on. So you don't even look at the inventory. Just know you're eating a diet that exceeds your body's ultimate capacity to handle it, even if your body hasn't bothered to complain. It's a really strong, wonderful body that's got a good immune system that's hiding this stuff away, that's got trillions of cells. So the suffering and the struggling beneath the surface may not show up. But if you start looking at the symptoms, they may show up. You may realize, you know what? I get a little tooth sensitivity now and then, and that really bothers me. Or I get a lot of tartar on my teeth. That's a big sign. I tend to get gritty junk in the morning stuck on my face. That's a sign. I tend to get nighttime urination. I have to wake up to pee. You shouldn't have to do that. If you do it more than once, it's a definitely a big red flag. If you see urine that looks kind of whitish sometimes and kind of, or even sparkly, that's crystalluria. That's oxalate crystals most likely peeing out. So if you got any urinary tract issues, if you get mood issues, if you have aches and pains, if you got thyroid issues, um, yeah, let's take a look at this chemical and just protect yourself as you would if you knew something was laced with lead. Would you continue to eat it or feed it to your family?
Absolutely not.
This is a similar thing.
Yeah. And
Luckily, the body is pretty knowledgeable about oxalates, and you give it a chance, and it'll try to recover. And that's a whole nother complication, though, because if you're over the age of 25 and you've been eating potatoes and peanuts and chocolate your whole life, you have a body burden of crystals hanging out in tendons, in your bones, your bone marrow, definitely your eyes and your thyroid gland, your kidneys. They're burdened by this. And they're going to take an advantage if you stop loading them up every meal of the day and calm it down and get out of these danger zone levels of consumption. You don't have to go to zero. This is not an allergy. You just have to cut out some really crazy things that get you in the 600s and the thousands. Get down to like 200 milligrams. You can take your 600 diet and cut it by 2/3. You'd be doing yourself a great favor. But you eventually run the risk of the body engaging with those crystals because now it's got an opportunity to remove them from the body. And so that's a complicating wrinkle because you don't get permanent relief because you're still high in oxalate after you stop eating it. So there's a little period of rest. For some people, it's only 3 days when they really come down to that low level where the body's like having a little moment of peace because you're not poisoning it with each meal. And you feel like, yeah, actually, I feel perky and I'm sleeping better and I'm not waking up as much or whatever. And then some of these symptoms can come back in a different way. You can get periods of gout or arthritis or back pain or kidney pain or crystalline urine again, or even crystalline stools, because your body will try to excrete it. You could get something going on with the skin. If you're prone to rashes and eczema and dermatitises, this could all be related to oxalate in your body.
wow. So I really appreciated that you said in the book and on your interviews that you don't have to drop down to zero at day one and don't. Because my goodness, my diet was so high. So I've been cutting out the obvious things, the chia seeds, the cacao powder, um, weaning down on nuts and seeds. But now I'm left with what do I eat? What's a quick snack? Like what do I look for at the grocery store? Because all of these things that I've been told for a decade are my superfoods and that I should be eating all day. I've been following that advice and now I'm lost. So can you give us some tips on what should we be eating?
There is this kind of like moment of like dizziness, like what the dog just hit me. What am I doing?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm lost. Just go through this lost stage. Everybody's going to have it. There's different stages of grief and anger too. Like my garden, I spent all my life being a major gardener and put a lot of time and money and weekends into it. It's like, wait a minute, I was poisoning myself with my own fig trees and my own this and that. I quit gardening for a year. I just needed a break.
Yeah.
I love plants. They don't love me back. Like, so there's lots of layers to this of getting comfortable with the topic. And I just say be patient with yourself first and foremost about having to have all the answers. The easy answer is that animal foods don't have oxalate and you need a lot of calcium. So if you can eat cheese, that's a great snack to stick in where you were doing nuts or whatever if you can do that. And now there's lots of other animal foods that would make good snacks, hard-boiled eggs and salamis and you name it. There's plenty if you start realizing it's easy. A can of tuna is a snack to me. Um, Getting good protein like that is a great idea, but not everybody's ready, because a lot of us who are in trouble, we've been plant freaks in our diet for a long time. I mean, 16 something years for me. And there's a process. So I think the most important thing is to be patient, but don't walk away from the topic. Keep coming back around and stay humble with the fact that there's a lot to learn. In fact, I feel like I should live another 70 years at least so I could learn more because there's a lot to learn. And there's a lot of data in the book, simplified. Keep coming back to it. Don't try to memorize anything and just be kind of a relaxed student. And there's swap lists, and my beginner's guide has a swap list too. So you can see, well, just buy lettuce instead of, spinach or the mixed grains. It's a lot of this is real simple. Instead of almond milk, use some coconut milk. And maybe you can use some lactate style milk if that was why you weren't doing milk to begin with. You could bring back a more nutritious, more digestible food that has a more full spectrum of the nutrients we need. So, you can use these lists, and it takes a little while to change habits of how you shop and how you eat and how you feed your family. I would say you're only making it hard because you're trying to do it too fast.
Right. Like we want to do it 100%, or at least I do.
Yeah, yeah, because most of us are so sincerely devoted to good health and nutrition. We want to get an A in our own lives. Hard to do that because real life is bumpier than that. But
Yeah. Yeah.
the
And when
other
you're
thing
working
is, if you're
so hard on your thyroid and your autoimmune
yeah, if
stuff,
you're
doing
suffering with health
everything.
problems, it's an urgent thing. Like, I gotta feel better today because I got a job, I got kids, I gotta take care of my house. I gotta feel better today. And we're in a rush. And because we don't feel well, we're not really good at learning. And it's a big lift to change your life when you don't feel well. So luckily, you can keep rereading the book. You can use the beginner's guide. You can use my website. The book is on tape. You can have it read it to you. But I would say the most important thing is to take this toxin that's in your food real seriously. Like, really pick this up as an important topic because those of us, I mean, I ruined every aspect of my life, my love life, my career, my body. There's nothing more important in life than having a functional body and brain. If you can't think straight and you can't use your body, hardly anything else in life matters except you got to not be homeless, right? Like, it's real fundamental. And so those of us like myself who've discovered late in life, I was just a few months from turning 50 when I figured this out, really wish we had known this when we were 2 weeks old. Like,
Right.
please, please come back to this topic, even though um, it might seem hard or weird, because you will be doing your future self an amazing favor. But there's these wrinkles. So if you can move more towards meals that are full of protein and fat, you won't even need snacks because you won't be hungry all the time. If you're eating too much carbs and too much plant foods, which really don't have enough nutrition in them because you're not boosting them with enough protein, you're going to be snacky, snacky, snacky. But once you actually give yourself solid food, a couple of solid meals can hold you and you can deal with whatever hunger or whatever comes up and not like, I got to eat all the time necessarily. So there's lots of angles to changing a diet. Everyone starts from where they are and just look for easy things to do, like you've done a really great start. And now it's a matter of, well, how could we make that breakfast more protein and some
Right.
healthy animal fats like ghee or butter so that you don't need a snack?
Right. Oh my goodness. So this interview, thank you so much for being here and for explaining this. My listeners are going to be, I think, probably like me. Their mind is going to be blown. Like you too. You said like your mind was just poof because it's such a paradigm change. But if it's something that we can do to improve our overall health, to affect our root cause, which is going to change everything, I think most people who listen are going to be willing to explore in detail. So if you're listening, I did both the print book and I did the audiobook. Um, I listened faster. Oh, I do not have the companion. Tell us about the companion because I don't have that.
Well, I thought this was for people like you, nurses and dietitians and people in the role of helping others, and that they would use this explanation about the data and then oxalate data that's color coded to help patients design their diet or, so on. But it turns out that some people find this like a simpler mini version to just dive in. Like, they don't need to know about why no one knows about it and why we're missing it in science and all the stuff I explained to try to answer like your husband's questions, there's probably a
Yeah.
chapter designed for every one of his questions in Toxic Superfoods, right?
Yeah.
This one gets you straight to the data, which I really don't recommend numbers. I don't think you should try to make this a numbers game and try to be too precise because it's fool's errand, basically. But surprisingly, a lot of people find this to be just a slam dunk for them for getting their head around it and just demonstrating to others, including their doctors, like some foods hardly don't have any oxalate and some foods have a lot. Like if you just know this and at a glance, you can see chard. This is happens to be the chard page. This is Swiss chard being completely toxic. And above it is cabbage. Cabbage is completely, this is a lucky little find we just had. And so just flipping through it, you get little lucky finds that drives it home simply.
Nice. Nice. So if you're just listening, the Data Companion is a nice spiral bound book which has beautiful charts. All right. Thank you so much. I know you've given us so much to listen or to think about and consider and then implement. And thank you for giving us solutions like quick swaps and the tip on more animal foods. I mean, that's something is just so basic. So if my husband is like, okay, what can you eat? I can say animal foods. And that is a wide. Now, if our chickens would just start laying eggs again, we're only getting one a day, which is not enough for a family of six. But
It's winter. It's hard to
I
lay an
know
egg in winter.
it is. It is.
Give
All
them a
right.
few
Thank you
months.
so
But
much
yeah,
for
and tell your
coming.
husband he can have a big old ribeye on me, big one
I will tell him that.
with
Thank you
butter
so
on it.
much, Sally. All
Lovely to
right.
be with you. Hopefully someone's been helped today. Thank you.
Yeah.